get started talking. The idea here was really to be able to provide sort of that immediate feedback. It seems like it's popping up live on all the channels, which is awesome. We'll just double check this because you never know. Perfect. Okay, so I am up live. Maybe. Bandwidth is always a challenge here. Let's see if this is going to kick in. Hi, Hardik. Thanks for joining. We are streaming live across Twitter, across YouTube, and LinkedIn. We just had a great keynote from Andy Jassy, which was excellent. And a ton of fun. We see people jumping in from around the world. Let me know where you're at. Let me know if you have questions. You can hit me up here on LinkedIn or on Twitter or on YouTube. Happy to answer them. Thank you for spending time. And also let me know if you watched the keynote. So it was streamed live around the world. I'm sure there was a few 100,000 people tuned in, 65,000 people at least here at reInvent watching it, which was that's just crazy. Right, that's absolutely crazy. Hey Corey, what's up with you, man? How you doing? Good of you to join, much appreciated. Let me just flip back and talk to my team here and make sure that everything is good on their side. Yeah, we're all good. I think we're set. I think we actually have enough bandwidth, which I gotta be honest, that's a miracle. It's as I've been doing speed tests this week, as more and more things have been getting rolling, it's just the bandwidth just keeps going, and that's totally expected. 65,000 people here on site, getting learning about the cloud, learning about the latest things from AWS. See, fantastic. Tanner, thanks for giving that webinar with John. John's a fantastic guy, talking about ZDI, our zero-day initiative, which actually ties into something I talked to Paul Hortop about on the live stream here. Sec 212 at AWS reInvent talks about how AWS handles vulnerability disclosure, and as with any Trend Micro webinar, so the one that Tanner and John just did, you can see on our webpage, and you can watch that review on demand. They're always fantastic. John does one every month. I'm normally talking about the latest threats. Swapnil, you were asking about container technology. Absolutely, Trend's got a huge solution around containers, both for image scanning as well as defense as you go. Just search up Cloud One. I'm sure the team can drop a link in the chat for us there. So yeah, thank you for jumping on the stream here, guys. We got a bunch of folks tuned in, which is great. Hopefully a lot of you are remote. The goal, one of my goals this week is to help you experience some of AWS reInvent from afar if you weren't able to make it. If you are here, you're probably streaming out of a keynote hall right now. You might have me in your ear, which is great. If you have questions, again, ask me here on LinkedIn or on YouTube or on Twitter, and feel free to share this around. I just really wanted to kind of give you some of my feeling, some of my just first knee-jerk impressions of what went on with the keynote. So this is the first year where they finally scheduled enough time for Andy's keynote. On the books for 3 hours, he hit it right on the spot. Actually finished a couple minutes short, which is great. That makes the logistics of reInvent way better, because traditionally what happens is that he goes long because there's so much great stuff in the keynote, and then the whole day is just crazy. So it was nice to see that there was a proper allotment of time there. So yeah, just seeing some questions in the stream here around scalability. Which specific scalability? If you can be a little clearer. I don't even want to try to pronounce your name because I'm going to mess it up, but Shasha Danand, if you could be a little clearer there, that'd be great, and then I'll get that addressed for you. And Alfeo, thanks for jumping in from Kenya. That's really, really cool. So yeah, Andy did his keynote, and there wasn't as many announcements as usual. Normally, there's a ton of announcements, and I actually really, really like that, because AWS has been spreading them out into what we're now calling pre-invent. So a couple weeks ahead of time for reInvent, we're seeing more and more critical announcements come across that are really, really interesting. So be sure to go check the AWS blog to see what's come out. On the security side, one of the absolutely critical things was the IAM, Identity and Access Manager, and Analyzer service. Rolled out for free to everybody yesterday. Every account got it. It's globally available, but I don't think it's region restricted. And basically, when you log into the S3 console, or the IAM console, you're going to see an analyzer option. And what ends up happening is that will give you just this really beautifully formatted table of here's an S3 bucket, here's an identity, and here's the access level they have. And you'd actually probably be really surprised at what permissions are there around different buckets that you've got. Free of charge, zero cost for it, nice API and CLI behind it so you can actually integrate those into your regular audits, double check if anything's changing, do differentials. Very, very cool. Check that on the AWS blog, the IAM Access Analyzer. So back to Shyandana's question there, or I should just go with his last name, Sharma. I can pronounce that. Apologies. Seriously, very much apologies for not being able to pronounce your name. So are you talking specifically about our container service? LinkedIn has a really, really horrible comment monitoring thing, which makes it really, really tough. Govind, the IAM available thing, I believe it's globally available. I don't think they region restricted it, so you can actually tag into that in IAM. I'm pretty sure it's in IAM. Let me double check because I was actually playing with it this morning. If you look at the blog, and I'll drop this into the comments, I'm just pulling it up here. Dear Lord, there's so many posts already. I'm like 3 pages in from yesterday alone, and it's just going. It's just nonstop going. Yeah, let me check for you. But I believe it is globally accessible, ready to go. And of course, now I'm into all the SageMaker stuff. But if I go to IAM, so in your console, go services, IAM, and on the side, if this ever loads, you may actually see the analyzer. Unfortunately, I can't share my screen with you right now. Yeah, so IAM Access Analyzer, and it should be globally available because IAM is a globally available service, though the Access Analyzer will push you out into a specific region. So make sure you check up in the top corner of your console, but I do believe that's available in the EU regions today. So Govind, you should be good in Norway, depending on where you're deploying, and that's a really simple service that will help you figure out what's going on with your AWS buckets. But that was part of the whole pre-invent deal. So that was announced yesterday, and this is the challenge with AWS, is you can literally be on stage, and this has happened to me before, where they announce a solution or a service to something you're talking about while you're on stage, because it's just this constant stream. So we had Andy's keynote that we're going to talk about in a second here, and then there's also these series of leadership sessions. So they're always, whatever track 201-L. So for securities, it's today at 1 o'clock. Security 201-L is a leadership session. There's going to be a bunch of service announcements in these leadership sessions as well. So stuff that didn't necessarily make the keynote, wasn't important enough for the big stage, or doesn't have a broad enough audience, can be pushed down to these leadership sessions. So I think for Sasha Dashan, seriously, I'm very, very sorry. This is rude of me not to be able to pronounce his name properly, but I'm also trying to glance and then came back to the camera. I think you're talking about our container security solution and scalability. Yes, we have customers who are using our container security, both for the image scanning as well as for the active protection at absolutely ridiculous scale, which is really, really fun. If you're particularly concerned about it, you can wrap up your question and then either fire it off to me here on social and I'll pass it to the right team, or I believe if it's specific to AWS containers, AWS at trendmicro.com will get to the right people, or you can come in and hit us up on social, and we'll make sure your specific question gets routed into the right folks. So let's get back to the thing at hand here, which is the keynote from Andy Jassy. So 3 full hours, not as many announcements as you would think, but some really, really critical ones. So let's start from the latest ones and then work our way back. So but the last 20 minutes of the keynote was really about the speed of light. So if you're following me on Twitter, I'm kind of ranting around on that, and you're probably thinking like, what is going on, dude? Why are you ranting about the speed of light? Well, they talked about 3 major things. They talked about outposts, local zones, and then wavelength. So these are three new service initiatives that most people aren't probably going to see. So the reason why I want to tackle this is so that it clears off some of your maybe misconceptions right out of the gate. So Outposts is literally a rack. It's a physical rack that you can order through your AWS console that gets shipped to your data center, and AWS will install it and make sure it's up and running, plugged into power and all that kind of stuff. And then you're all set with the physical access to some core AWS services like EC2, like EFS, like EMR. S3 is coming soon. And essentially what this is for customers who are locked into a data center or want the physical assurance of knowing where their compute or data is sitting. And thank you, Sachi. I appreciate your understanding. Yeah, just keep adding the details here and I can see it. So Sachi, let me know if it was specifically around scalability there. Or you can, like you said, hit me up. My contact info is here on LinkedIn, or you can get me on Twitter, and I'll direct it to the right team. So for Outposts, it's this situation where most of you might think, like, why do I care? I'm in the cloud. I don't need to worry about it. But there are a number of organizations that I talk to on a regular basis that are locked into data center leases, or they have data at such a high sensitivity that they cannot legally move it into somewhere where they don't have physical control, and that's where Outposts comes into play. So it's a physical rack that shows up. It's got all these services so that you get an endpoint localized that you can start to access all the EC2 goodness that you're used to. So it's a good way to get your developers and your teams working on the modern AWS technology stack while getting around these constraints, right? And obviously it's lower latency because it's right in your data center, and you should be 10 gig connected in, or at least 1 gig connected in from your endpoints, and really consistent. So that's Outposts. Very, very cool for a very specific niche. Speaking of specific niches, local zones. First one's in LA, there's more coming. And again, this is like a mini availability zone deployed physically close to a point of presence. So you can think of it between an AZ. So every region has at least 3 AZs. Every AZ has at least 3 of what you would think of as data centers in it. And then there's these AWS points of presence, the edge. And the edge is where you get things like CloudFront. It's where you get things like Lambda at edge, AWS WAF and Shield are deployed at the edge. Route 53 is deployed at the edge. So the edge is a number of points of presence around the world. Last time I checked the official listing, there was like 150, 160 of them. They pop up all over the place because they are trying to make it easier for you to deliver content physically closer to the users. So an example I was giving in a presentation I gave back home in Canada was I was in Toronto, which is sort of slightly east of center. And if you were trying to deal with Vancouver, which is a city on the west coast, it was a 75 millisecond trip there and a 75 millisecond trip back. Now that doesn't seem like a lot, except now at least a round trip packet or response to one of your users is at least 150 milliseconds. And we know from the great user research that the Nielsen Norman Group has done that anything over 100 milliseconds, you feel like you're doing the action and not the system. It doesn't feel nearly as responsive. Sub 100 milliseconds, it feels like it's instantaneous. You click a button and something happens right away. From 100 milliseconds to a second, it feels like you're causing the action, but it's still acceptable for users. Over a second is where users start to mentally disconnect from activity. So if you're going from Toronto to Vancouver in Canada, or you could think of it New York to like Idaho in the States, then you're already, just by the speed of light, 150 milliseconds, which means you have, you've already burned past the instant kind of feeling, and you're up against the clock without actually having done any processing, which really sounds weird, but it makes a huge difference. And that's where local zones comes into play, is that they're trying to push compute out closer to the edge to major centers without having to build out a full region there, because it doesn't make sense. Regions are obviously absolutely massive investments by AWS, but also it doesn't make sense from our perspectives to have those many regions. You want to have this sort of mini zone, which is the local zone approach. And then the final thing in the speed of light area was wavelengths. They had the Verizon CEO on talking about all this 5G stuff, and he made it sound really cool and amazing. Let me tell you right now, 5G is not, there's a huge amount of hype around 5G. It's ridiculous. 5G is a set of technologies, is not one thing. So when you say, oh, I've got LTE, That's just, it's a series of bands and a method of communicating that's far simpler than 5G. 5G is a multitude of wavelengths, which means you have antennas that do high bandwidth, so really, really fast, but not very far. And then you have stuff that's not nearly as fast that goes super, super far. And 5G, you need to do this huge mix of it. So a great example, there was a good video on YouTube from Marques Brownlee, MKHBD. He did one on a test of 5G, and when it was at the end of the block, and when he turned around the corner, his bandwidth just tanked. So there's a lot of problems with 5G, and the networks are working on it. AWS Wavelength is AWS putting their technology right into those networks, which for us, when it's working, when those networks are up and running, means even lower latency, again, kind of getting around the speed of light. We were just, I'm just looking at here, and there's a really interesting comment from Govind around data protection in EU, around GDPR, with Trend Microstatus around Privacy Shield and storing various data in AWS US regions. Absolutely, totally understand what you're talking about. We have a number of services that we run from Trend Micro that are deployed from a number of different locations around the world. Depending on the service, depending on your concerns, you need to know physically where they're located. We can help you out with that and your specific concerns, Govind. Just shoot me an email or connect with me, and I'll route you to the right folks. Because yeah, it's a question I actually deal with quite often. So we should be able to clear that up here. I don't want to divert on the stream by tackling that, but absolutely legitimate concern, and legitimate concern dealing with AWS. This is why they have a number of regions around the world and continue to expand, because there are legislative requirements, GDPR being chief among them, where data needs to be in certain places, and that kind of ties back to outposts. So that was the big chunk at the end, was outposts, and it was really talking about the speed of light, which is not something we think about that often, which is probably a good thing given how nerdy it is. Let me just double check with my team on the back end. They're monitoring comments on YouTube and on Twitter for me, because I'm purely mobile. So I got an iPad here, I got the phone managing the stream, and I'm watching the LinkedIn stream. So the LinkedIn stream gives me a little bit easier to respond to comments in the flow. So back to the keynote. We talked about the speed of light. The middle hour almost was on AI, which was amazing. So I fired out a tweet where I customized the slide Andy showed, and there's really 3 layers of AI in the AWS cloud. There's the baseline layer that is all about the really deep nuts and bolts of it, where most of us will never go. This is where you're actually writing code against PyTorch, against TensorFlow, against MXNet, against these really low-level machine learning libraries. And if that's your jam, awesome. Check out the AWS Deep Learning AMI. It's fully managed and configured with all those things. And there's a bunch of services they put in place, like the Inferentia chips, like the Elastic GPUs, to speed all this stuff up. Really cool, really amazing, but for most people, just not a real concern. Totally get it, totally understand. Where most people are going to live is actually at the top layer. That's where we get services like Amazon Recognition for image and video detection. We get Transcribe, we get Translate, we get Poly, Lex, all of these things that are very simple, where you have something, you give it to the service, and you get an analysis back. There was one big announcement there, which is Amazon Kendra. That is a phenomenal new service. Now I need to dig deeper on the security side, because I'm hoping IAM is deeply integrated in it to help you implement your information management policies. But essentially what Kendra is it is a machine learning structure that is a search engine for your enterprise data. So you point at your enterprise data, not only is it going to index it, it's going to run it through natural language processing, it's going to run it through Textract, it's going to run it through, Textract looks at images and PDFs and pulls out text information, including forms and tables. It's going to throw it through Comprehend, which is the natural language processing service, and what that does is actually pulls out meaning. It's looking at the semantics of language, and they have a whole host of support. They launched with 6 languages last year, and I think they're up to 18 or 20 at this point. You have to check the Comprehend site on that. But essentially what it does is it's looking for semantic structure, so nouns and verbs, adjectives, punctuation, stuff like that in the text itself, but it also does topic modeling for content. So what Kendra does is it's looking at your all of your documents. It's using Transcribe. I think it's using Transcribe to take some audio and video and stuff like that, but I'll have to double check on that, so don't hold me to that. But it's using Comprehend to break that text down. So after it finds the text, it's running it through Comprehend to figure out, what does this mean? so that it can answer queries semantically, right? So it's using Lex to manage those queries. So the example Dr. Wood gave, Matt was talking about if you're saying like, when's the help desk open, instead of just giving you a whole bunch of references to help desk pages, it actually pulled out the results like Google does and says, hey, it's open 12 to 5. So Kendra seems very, very interesting. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of questions that we're going to have to dive into around privacy, around security, around information management, pricing as well. That's going to be huge. But it seemed really, really useful as far as that type of giving you meaning in your enterprise data, because you have a whole bunch of Word docs kicking around and a whole bunch of Excel spreadsheets kicking around. You know you do. This service is targeted at helping you bubble up the information in there to make it shareable. And that seems really, really valuable and really, really critical. You could have built this yourself using the AWS building blocks, but the nice thing about a service like Kendra, you don't have to. Similar on the side, if you're in the contact center business, or if you have a contact center, or if you run an internal help desk, Contact Lens for Amazon Connect does the same kind of thing. It does call analysis, sentiment analysis on those calls to give you an idea of how well things are performing. So if you're running a public business, the fact that everybody's angry at you, you can put a number at. But if you're even internally for help desk stuff, and of course I'm kidding, but we've all had that bad experience on the phone with a customer service rep. For internal stuff, it's actually quite useful as well. So if you're running an internal help desk, you can monitor how well you're doing. But better than that, bubbling up the content, the same thing, comprehend, looking at the content and the semantics of what people are saying, lets you figure out where problems are starting to get worse or where you're making progress. Comprehend's a really interesting service, and I don't think people give it enough credit. I don't think people use it enough simply because it's kind of hard to approach. But as far as natural language processing goes, it is orders of magnitude easier with Comprehend than with just trying to do it yourself. So that's the top level. We talked about the bottom level with the TensorFlow and MXNet. The middle level of machine learning took an insane amount of time in the keynote because it was really, really revolutionary. Now, I don't agree with them launching these all as separate services, because essentially what this means is that Amazon SageMaker, which is that entire middle level, is now a complete data science suite. So it starts with Studio, which is the IDE, and then they announced several sub-services in there that they call them out separately. So notebooks, AutoML, experiments, processing, and a few others are all in there listed as new separate services. Again, I sent out a tweet with a link to the AWS News blog around that. That will help you guys figure out what all of those things are, because they're really, really important. And I'm just going to actually grab that tweet and drop it into the chat for you guys instead of just saying randomly, hey, I sent out a tweet. This would probably be far more helpful for you guys. There it is. Let me just grab this. There we go. Back to this. So here's the tweet on that. This also will remind me that the comments on SageMaker announcements, that the comments are working. Perfect. Yes, comments are still working. It's a good little sanity check. When you're live streaming like this, you always got to double check, and any little trick you can do, which is always kind of always kind of handy to make that work. So SageMaker is all about Jupyter Notebooks. It's all about data science, and essentially what you have is you have data somewhere, and you want to run a bunch of analysis and various models to train it. And what the announcements came today was that now you have a new development environment, this SageMaker Studio, to do that with. Including in there is some strong debugging tools, notebook management tools. So notebooks are these weird files. They're really, really useful, but they're hard to explain to people because they're files that contain both references to data, as well as the code and then the analysis of the data all in one place. Once you get used to working like that, it's insanely useful. So there's some new tools within SageMaker, the suite of SageMaker now that will help with that with Notebook. Same with experiments. So a lot of the time you'll take a data and you'll a set of data and you'll have a hypothesis. You want to run an experiment against it. That experiment needs to scale. And then you'll run multiple experiments concurrently to try to get different results. Experiments within the SageMaker suite will help you run that now, help you kind of keep track of it. And again, it's another feature where AWS is just making it simpler and simpler for you to focus on delivering value and pulling value out of your services and out of your data, which is really, really great. And then the final one is the AutoML, and I don't think you can discount how really important this is. Essentially, it's SageMaker, you being able to point SageMaker at your data and saying, do whatever you think is best and show me some results and we'll go from there. So I think what most people's data science flow, unless you have a very specific idea of what you want to accomplish with your data set, is going to start with ML. You're going to start with AutoML and you're pointing at the data and you're going to say, generate me, I think by default it does 50 models, it was saying. Again, you have to read the blog post just to make sure, but it generates a whole bunch of sample models based on what it thinks the data supports. And then you can evaluate those results and see, is AutoML along the right track? Or am I going to have to go and use the rest of these new features within SageMaker Studio to fine-tune my machine learning efforts? So really, data science on AWS took a huge jump forward. The way I'd sum it up on Twitter was last year the announcement of SageMaker made machine learning and data science an order of magnitude easier, and they've done that yet again today. So 2 orders of magnitude in 12 months. I don't think you can underestimate or overestimate. You can't overestimate how much this is going to help push data science efforts and machine learning efforts in your organization together. And from a security perspective, I think we don't use machine learning enough on the operational side of security. At Trend, we've been using machine learning on our back end for a very, very long time on threat analysis. And we're really mature along that path, and we continue to push and innovate there. And you as customers see that in our products. But what I mean is around operational security. So when you are analyzing log files, when you are monitoring your network, when you're looking at your development flow, I don't think people use machine learning enough there. And that ties to another announcement that AWS made during the keynote. Andy Jassy announced a new service, AWS Code Guru. It's a machine learning model tuned on AWS's internal code as well as a bunch of open source projects to look for common issues with code. It's an automated code review service. One of the examples they called out was a security one, which I was just like, oh, thank you, that's amazing, was that they were looking for, like failure to do input validation, which leads to the number one issue for the last decade in web apps, which is injection attacks. So having an automated code review that integrates with GitHub right out of the gate, as well as code pipeline, is really cool, because then basically when you do a PR or when you accept a PR, it was when you did a PR or when you accept a PR. I'm not sure where it was, but when you do a pull request, you include Code Guru, and it's actually going to automatically do that code review and generate some human readable results, which I thought was really, really, really cool. Another big one I wanted to call out was, we already talked about the IAM Access Analyzer, data endpoints. So in the data lake, there was a sea of Redshift announcements. Redshift continues just to kick butt. They keep announcing a ton of stuff, but I think a lot of people can actually get away from actually running a bunch of, the depth of Redshift by using S3, Athena, QuickSight, and SageMaker. I don't think you need to go to the data warehousing stuff as much. You can fine tune a lot. And I just see Christopher here on the thing is saying, talking about experiments. If you're running a lot of different models, yeah, it's huge, man. Definitely mirrors that Splunk product, but it's one of those things where I can tell you as much about this as, I can just drone on, and unfortunately for everybody involved, I do drone on and on. But until you start to use it, you don't realize just how useful a feature like experiments in SageMaker is. Same with the debugger, or even that Code Guru piece. But back to those S3 endpoints. So I have long had a challenge trying to help people understand how S3 security works. So bear with me as I get on my soapbox for 2 minutes and tell you that every bucket in S3 starts life locked down. Someone has made an explicit decision, usually a mistake, to unlock it and open it up. So we've seen a number of features deployed, including that IAM Access Analyzer yesterday, to help you understand that, hey, this bucket is public when it shouldn't be public. And then this new Access Endpoint is actually designed to help you, give you an alternative to some of the difficult to understand authentication options in S3 right now. So a lot of people use custom S3 URLs to provide the ability for applications or people to upload files or to read files on S3. Data access endpoints can be filtered by tag and by bucket to make it easier to give a unique URL right into that with different authentication around it. It's just another tool in the toolkit to help make sure that your data stays private or stays locked down to the people that you want it to, as opposed to opening everything up to public, because that's the only way to get it to work. Access points are available today, generally available on everybody. During the keynote, I logged into my S3 account. They were there. They're the final tab when you're looking at a bucket. You've got your permissions, you've got your properties. That other one, never click on that tab, obviously, and then access points, which is really, really cool. So if you have any data in S3, so it's all of you, it's worth checking out the IAM Access Analyzer and the access points. I don't know what the pricing on access points is. I think it's probably pretty low if it's not free. So double check that. As with anything with AWS, when they announce a new service, all of it sounds super cool. It's really easy to get kind of carried up in it. You want to double check the pricing, and you want to double check that you're not going to run up an unexpected bill. A lot of people had that with Macy 2 years ago, where they're like, this is amazing, I can check for issues in S3, and then boom, right out of the gate, they're hitting a huge bill. That reminds me, actually, one of the new services with Trend Micro's new Cloud One product is S3 file scanning. We have a demo of it here in reInvent. I think we've got some information about it up on the Trend Micro website under Cloud One. That product is coming soon, and very cool to help you look for malware in your S3 buckets, using some really cool machine learning models behind the scenes, which is nice. So yeah, lots of stuff announced today, but I think, the last thing I want to tackle, because I know everyone's got a super busy day, and again, keep the comments coming here on LinkedIn, even after the stream, or on Twitter at Trend Micro, or you can hit me up at MarkNCA, MARKNCA. One of the big things was sort of Andy's theme, and yes, depending on how you view it, somewhat cheesy with the music and the quotes, but I think it was a good way to tie the keynote together. It's an interesting kind of hook, but the key thing was talking about transformation. We got into a bit of a discussion on it on Twitter, and I think what was interesting for me, at least, and let me just adjust this a little bit, what was interesting for me, at least, was the cultural side. People are starting to realize the impact of it. And most of the time people are like, yeah, it's just technology, why do I need to worry about the culture? And for me, when I see what I see talking to organizations around the world, is the difference between people who are really excelling and succeeding and getting ahead of their competitors, is that they've flipped the internal culture. For the longest time, IT, and I don't know how we got away with this, to be honest, but IT has been a cost center, and it's essentially a race to see who spends less, and gets a reasonably okay product from their IT organization. When you go to AWS Cloud, you can do the same thing. You can just drop what you have as is into the AWS Cloud, and it'll work, and you'll actually get some benefits. You're not going to save a ton of money, but you'll get some benefits out of it around resiliency, reliability, recovery, that kind of stuff. But for companies that start to adjust the culture, to realize that now they have a different set of tools at their disposal, you're going to really start to see them accelerate. And unfortunately, the customer examples today weren't stellar, because they really, they treat it more of a marketing opportunity than one to come out and say, listen, here's what we used to do, here's what we do now, and look at the difference. So what we're talking about here is really experimentation and innovation. So AWS has a concept they call the innovation flywheel. It's not theirs, but they're using it. Everybody is sort of. It's, you have an idea, you run an experiment, you get some feedback, and you keep that loop going. And the way that the AWS cloud works, the fact that everything's available through an API, it's pay-as-you-go pricing, that innovation flywheel means you can run things like SageMaker experiments and go, you know what, I'm not really sure if this is going to pan out, but it's worth an $8 investment to look at these 30 years of sales data to see if we have a market that we're ignoring that could be a huge profit center for us, right? Also, you don't have to do that in SageMaker. You can use Amazon Forecast, which is a high-level AI service from them that is exactly for that purpose. But that kind of thing is there. And if you start to think about what you're building in the AWS cloud is not locked in stone. You need to constantly update. So, the last 3 weeks of announcements mean that everybody who's built in the AWS cloud should really take all of January to evaluate some of these new services to see if something they've built as sort of a hack, as something that they've built as a workaround, can now be pushed out, right? That's one of the core tenets of the well-architected framework, is this constant innovation. You're never done. You want to keep up to speed on things and evaluate, is one of these new, for Redshift, is Aqua, that query accelerator, a better solution than the way you've sharded your data in the background to make queries faster? Maybe Aqua is going to be cheaper and provide better results. Maybe it's just cheaper. Maybe it's more expensive with worse results. I don't know. You have to answer that for yourself, but that's a different way of thinking, because of the rapidity of change, the speed of change, because the accessibility of all this stuff, of this technology, it changes how you can deliver IT. And Andy was trying to touch on that today, talking about transformation, but it really does take a cultural change, because you can't have the IT department like way back and going, okay, we'll take your requirements and come back to you, or even a 3-week agile sprint. It really needs to be hand in hand. You need to be working together. Selfishly, from a security and privacy perspective, security and privacy should be part of that, working hand in hand as well. That's a whole nother rant that I guarantee you I will do at some point. But that was the main theme for Mandy's keynote. Yes, there was a lot of cool announcements. There was some really fun stuff that I can't wait to dive into. A lot of generally available stuff, which was nice. Some stuff that's coming in 2020, understandably, but it's nice to get your hands on stuff today. Also, don't forget, if you're interested in Deep Composer, which is the generative adversarial network AI teaching tool with the piano, sign up for the preview today, and sign up on Amazon.com to get notified when the actual keyboard comes out. But most of the stuff he announced was actually accessible today. You can log into your console, you can start playing around with it. The SageMaker stuff should be there later today. It wasn't there during the keynote, but normally that pops up by end of day. Don't discount the cultural side. For those of you that are cloud native, born in the cloud, it's just a way of doing things. For those of you at larger organizations, the people side takes time. It can be really difficult to keep it going and moving, but it's definitely worth the effort. That's how you get the most value out of your IT spend, especially out of your AWS cloud, or if you're using another cloud provider spend, is understanding that cultural shift. And there's great ways to do it. That's actually one thing that's going to come up I'm giving a talk later today with Jason Craddock from Pivot. We're going to be talking about his journey from traditional IT to microservices based in a really conservative industry in oil and gas. And one of the references I'm bringing up during that talk is the Cloud Adoption Framework. If you haven't already checked it out, check it out on the AWS website. It's a free white paper. It's a monstrous white paper. They do it as a professional service consulting thing, but you don't need them. You can do it yourself. And it essentially maps out the things that can change and the things that you can push on for change around culture to deliver better business outcomes. And that's something in IT we don't talk about nearly enough. So thank you very much for joining us here, on this 30-minute rant pre-keynote. The keynote was very, very cool. If you didn't see it itself, it'll be up on the AWS YouTube channel shortly. You can check out the AWS blog for all the latest news. Follow me at MarkNCA on Twitter all week. Follow us on Trend Micro at Trend Micro on Twitter all week. Here on LinkedIn, we'll be back streaming a couple more times. I think tomorrow we're streaming with Sneak from the show floor. I think we're going to be trying to bring you live from Security Jam. We're going to be doing a keynote recap from Werner's keynote on Thursday if we have time, and if bandwidth permits. That is always the caveat, if bandwidth permits. As you know, if you've been following us for a while, we had some challenges there. But I appreciate you spending your time with me post-keynote. Keep the questions coming. I really like interacting with you folks and having some great conversations. And I hope you have a fantastic day wherever around the world